Hello everyone, welcome to DEEPSIGHT. In the last episode, we talked about the profound impact of the Renaissance on Europe. Today, we will continue to travel through time and space to unfold a magnificent historical picture scroll together, and see how France has gradually leaped from a feudal kingdom to the hegemony of Europe after the Renaissance. The rise of France came from their strong political changes, from feudal separatism to centralization. First of all, the establishment, rise and fall of the three-level conference, and the strengthening of royal power. In 1302, Philip IV convened the three-level conference, representatives of priests, nobles, and citizens, for the first time to fight against the Pope, but its power was always limited by the king. During the 100 Years' War, the three-level conference briefly obtained the right to levy taxes, but in 1439, Charles VII passed the Orleans Decree to establish the king's power to levy taxes without the consent of Parliament, marking the decline of the three-level conference. After 1614, the three-level conference was interrupted for 175 years until the French Revolution in 1789. This trend of power centralization laid the institutional foundation for France to establish a unified nation-state. The political reform of France must mention the political conspiracy of Richelieu and Mazarin. During his tenure as prime minister from 1624 to 1642, Richelieu passed the regulations of the Council of State to concentrate decision-making on the royal meeting, stipulating that the king would preside over core government affairs 3 times a week, weakening the political power of the great nobles. At the same time, the French Academy, 1635, was established to standardize French and use language as a tool to strengthen national identity. He also deprived Protestants of their military privileges through the Edict of Grace of Alès, 1629, completely ending the religious war. During the regency of Mazarin, from 1643 to 1661, Richelieu's centralized policy was continued, and the Noble Rebellion was defeated in the Fronde movement from 1648 to 1653, freeing the French monarchy from the dual constraints of theocracy and aristocracy, making it the most powerful centralized state in Europe. Richelieu is a model of spies governing the country, and he also pioneered the banned book business. This cardinal established France's first modern spy network and even planted spies in the Vatican. But what is less known is that his hobby is actually a cultural elite, the first generation of internet celebrity. He was a best-selling author, using the pseudonym Mr. Otis, and published the masterpiece Politics, talking about the theory of national interests first. Even more ironic is that the original task of the French Academy he founded was to censor banned books, but this magical operation became an incubator for Enlightenment thought 100 years later. Let's take a look at how the French economy took off. During this period, French mercantilism and colonial expansion played a decisive role. Louis XIV finance minister Colbert served from 1661 to 1683. He implemented a systematic mercantilist policy. High tariffs, including a 50% tariff on imported textiles, protected local industries, and established royal handicraft workshops to monopolize luxury goods production. The Sèvres porcelain workshop produced porcelain worth 2 million livres in 1664 alone. The Gobelins tapestry factory, 1662, employed more than 2,000 craftsmen, and its products were exported to various European countries. He presided over the construction of the Canal du Midi, 1681, to connect the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea, reducing the transportation cost of wine in the Languedoc region by 40%. He also established the East India Company, 1664, and the West India Company, 1664, to monopolize trade with India and North American colonies. By 1680, the trade volume of French colonies accounted for 23% of the total European trade volume, and Louisiana, named in 1682, and French India, Pondicherry, became important sources of wealth. During his tenure, Mazarin also exchanged 45 diamonds for fleet support from the Republic of Venice, which were later made into the famous Regent diamonds. He was also obsessed with Chinese culture and built a Chinese pavilion on the outskirts of Paris, which was filled with blue and white porcelain and lacquered screens, and even let the servants wear silk robes embroidered with dragon patterns, which was 100 years earlier than Voltaire's China fever. and French porcelain technology also originated from China. In order to crack the secret recipe of Chinese porcelain, Colbert funded the alchemist Bont and let him disguise himself as a missionary to sneak into Jingdezhen. Although Bont did not get the kaolin formula, he brought back the enamel technology, which eventually gave birth to the glaze era of Sèvres porcelain. What's more, he stipulated that all royal porcelain must be printed with the initials of Louis XIV as a logo, which may be the earliest brand patent in human history. Therefore, the French's ability to create luxury goods in a market-oriented way should be attributed to the era of Louis XIV. The economic boom was also accompanied by the emergence of various new things. John Law's Mississippi Company scam during the Louis XV period was a textbook of modern financial bubbles. He claimed that the Mississippi River basin was full of gold, fooled the French into exchanging gold coins for stocks, and even women working in special industries on the streets were enthusiastically investing in jewelry. When the bubble burst, the streets of Paris were filled with suicidal speculators, and he himself quietly fled France with his mistress through the back door, leaving behind a classic quote about financial scams. The essence of bubbles is to make fools believe that they can become smart people. At the same time, France started a new agricultural innovation and financial system. During the reign of Henri IV, the three-field rotation system, namely winter wheat, spring wheat, and fallow, was promoted, which increased the wheat production in the Paris basin by 40% in 10 years, and the food price dropped sharply by 25%. During the reign of Louis XIV, the financial director Fouquet tried to establish a national bank in 1667. Although this plan failed due to political struggles, it provided experience for subsequent financial reforms. In the 1680s, France raised war funds by issuing public bonds with an annual interest rate of 5% to 7%. By 1715, the scale of French national debt reached 2.5 billion livres. These funds supported the construction of the Palace of Versailles, which cost 200 million livres, and supported France's military expansion, making France the most financially stable power in Europe at the end of the 17th century. The steady development of politics and economy will inevitably lead to the rise of military hegemony, which is very similar to the world pattern today. The representative events during this period are the Italian War and the conquest of the Sun King. The prosperity of France is first of all the pioneering practice of military modernization brought about by the advancement of science and technology. In the early 16th century, France introduced the phalanx tactics of Swiss mercenaries and developed a mixed force with 6,000 spearmen as the core and 2,000 musketeers. In 1515, France defeated the Swiss mercenaries in the Battle of Marignano, demonstrating the combat effectiveness of the new army. During the reign of Louis XIV, military engineer Vauban invented the bastion defense system, which used pentagonal fortresses with dikes and trenches to make border fortresses such as Strasbourg an impregnable iron city. The bastion designed by this military engineer must have each corner accurate to 45 degrees, and the depth of the trench must be 1.5 times the height of the city wall. He had argued with Louis XIV for 3 whole days over the design of the Strasbourg fortress. In the end, the king was completely driven crazy and had no choice but to compromise. The Sun King said, "Your drawings are more complicated than my crown, but if it can stop the enemy, you can draw however you want." The square field defense system forms a deep defense network through dense fortresses. Its core idea is to exchange space for time, use layers of defense to delay the enemy's advance, and buy time for strategic counterattacks. This concept was continued in the Maginot Line. The defense line consists of a triple barrier consisting of the main defense line, the village defense line, and the rear fortress, and even built a 450-kilometer railway network underground to achieve troop mobility. The concrete fortifications of the Maginot Line also implement this principle. Each main bunker is equipped with a 75mm cannon and machine gun, and the angle calculation of the shooting hole achieves no dead angle coverage. Even trenches are set up at the front of the fortifications in the Alps to form a death zone similar to the Vauban era. The iconic design of the Vauban bastion is the crossfire of the multifaceted forts. Through the dikes and trenches of the pentagonal fortress, the defenders' artillery can cover all offensive routes. Today, the Vauban defense system in Strasbourg is still in operation and has become a United Nations World Heritage Site. The peculiarity of the French army is also the fashionable military rules of Louis XIV. The Sun King stipulated that soldiers must wear white feather hats, embroidered royal emblems on the boots, and even gilded the triggers of muskets. His reason is, let the enemy be shocked by the majesty of the French army from a mile away. This concept of beauty is combat effectiveness is very advanced. France is worthy of being the fashion capital. Even the killing machine must be built with elegant artistic sense. This approach really worked. In the Franco-Dutch War of 1672, when the Dutch soldiers saw the neat blue and white uniforms of the French army's marching pace, bands and war drums, they actually mistook it for a moving palace, and the army was in chaos. With the development of military technology, in 1672, the size of the French standing army reached 120,000 people, equipped with bronze field artillery. The firing rate increased to 2 rounds per minute, and standardized flintlock rifles, the famous Charleville M1688 rifles. France's military expenditure accounted for 65% of the national fiscal expenditure, becoming the first professional and standardized modern army in Europe. The Battle of Rocroi in 1643 became a key battle that determined the European situation. 28,000 French troops faced 22,000 Spanish invincible corps. The French army used cavalry roundabout tactics to break through the Spanish phalanx, killed more than 8,000 Spanish warriors, and captured 4,000 people. This marked the end of Spanish hegemony, and the French army began to dominate Europe. The Franco-Dutch War broke out from 1672 to 1678. Louis XIV personally led an army of 120,000 to invade the Netherlands. Although he encountered stubborn resistance from the sea coachmen, he eventually annexed Franche-Comté through the Treaty of Nijmegen, forcing the Netherlands to cede the southern Netherlands in present-day Belgium, thus establishing France's dominant position in Western Europe. 20 years later, from 1701 to 1714, the War of the Spanish Succession broke out. Although the war consumed a lot of French national strength, Philip V of the Bourbon family eventually won and ascended the Spanish throne, forming a French-Spanish royal alliance, controlling 1/3 of the European territory, and France's hegemony on the European continent reached its peak. Political, economic, and military strength, from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. The French culture and art also reached the peak of history. First, the French art and architecture reached the Golden Age. Francis first reigned for 32 years from 1515 to 1547. During this period, he introduced the Italian Renaissance to France. In 1516, he invited Leonardo da Vinci to settle in Amboise Castle, and his late work, Mona Lisa, flowed into France with the master. In 1519, he started to build the Château de Chambord, which combines Gothic spires with Renaissance domes. The 365 chimneys symbolize the dates of the whole year and become the symbol of French architecture. During the Louis XIV period, the Hall of Mirrors of the Palace of Versailles, which was completed in 1682, was 73 meters long. 17 large mirrors reflected 17 floor-to-ceiling windows, and the geometric garden covered an area of 800 hectares, densely covered with sculptures, showing the majesty of the king in an absolutely symmetrical classical style. Its design concept was quickly imitated by the courts of Prussia, Russia, and other countries. In addition to architectural art, literature and philosophy also launched a large-scale ideological revolution. Montaigne's Essays was published in 1580, which pioneered modern prose with the spirit of self-reflection in which I explore myself. In 1637, Descartes' Discourse on Method proposed, "I think, therefore I am," pushing rationalist philosophy to its peak. In the field of drama, in 1664, Molière's The Hypocrite criticized the corruption of the church through the hypocritical image of Tartuffe. Molière is not only a great writer, but also an actor who practices what he preaches. In 1673, Molière played the leading role in The Hypocrisy. He coughed up blood due to tuberculosis, but he insisted on finishing the last scene. He collapsed on the stage at the curtain call and passed away that night. What is even more dramatic is that the church that was whipped by Molière not only did not praise his great professionalism, but refused to hold a funeral for him on the grounds that being an actor was an unclean profession. It was difficult to bury him without the blessing of the church in that era. In the end, it was not until Louis XIV had to personally coordinate that the comedy master was buried. In 1667, Racine's Andromache explored human conflicts in the form of ancient Greek tragedy. The French Academy, founded in 1635, took 44 years to compile the first Dictionary of the French Academy and published it in 1694, standardizing French grammar and vocabulary, so that French eventually replaced Latin as the European diplomatic language in the 17th century. The Nijmegen Peace in 1679 was written in French for the first time, marking the establishment of French cultural hegemony. At the same time, the ideas of the Enlightenment radiated throughout France. In the 18th century, the Paris Salon became the center of ideological excitement. Voltaire settled in Ferney Manor in 1758 and wrote philosophical correspondence, criticizing the autocratic system. However, Voltaire's experience was full of vicissitudes. Voltaire was imprisoned in the Bastille for 11 months for satirizing the Regent Duke of Orleans. In prison, he completed the epic Henriade, but after being released from prison, he dramatically became a top writer famous throughout Europe. In order to expand his influence, he also invented the vest tactic, using more than 30 pseudonyms to publish articles all over Europe, and even remotely controlled the publishing market in Paris and Switzerland. He can be called the godfather of self-media in the 18th century. Another master, Rousseau, proposed the theory of sovereignty of the people in The Social Contract in 1762. This advancement provided a theoretical basis for the future democratic system and was deeply influenced by the future French Revolution. From 1751 to 1772, Diderot's encyclopedia brought together 160 scholars including D'Alembert, included more than 70,000 entries in science, technology, and art, and printed 24,000 copies to circulate throughout Europe. French culture publishes more than 2,000 new books each year, and Paris theaters perform 400 plays each year. Its fashion field has developed Rococo clothing and pompadour hairstyles. The French lifestyle has penetrated into the courts of European countries. The nobles of Vienna and St. Petersburg use French and read French novels to show their status. Paris became the capital of the world in the 18th century. After the signing of the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, France obtained part of the territory of Alsace and Lorraine and had the right to intervene in the affairs of the German princes and establish its influence in Central Europe. Louis XIV used the natural frontier policy to launch the War of Succession from 1667 to 1668, the Franco-Dutch War from 1672 to 1678, and the War of the Grand Alliance from 1688 to 1697, expanding his territory to the Rhine and the Pyrenees. By the end of the 17th century, France controlled a quarter of Europe's population, reaching 22 million. It also controlled the richest regions in Europe, with an army size of 400,000, 5 times that of Britain and 3 times that of Spain. In 1689, the number of naval vessels reached 300, far exceeding the total of the Netherlands and Sweden. After the War of the Spanish Succession in 1701, the Bourbon dynasty ruled France and Spain at the same time. Although it was forced to abandon the merger of the two countries due to the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, France's hegemony on the European continent was unshakable, and it became the most powerful superpower in Europe at that time. In 1682, Louis XIV moved the court to the Palace of Versailles and specially ordered people to paint the mural "The King's Conquests" on the ceiling of the Hall of Mirrors. One of the details is intriguing. The conquered barbarians are topless, holding the golden fleece, a symbol of wealth, in their hands. This is both a tribute to the Roman triumphal ceremony and a silent deterrence to European countries. When King Frederick of Prussia visited the Hall of Mirrors, he whispered to his attendants, "In front of the Sun King, we are all just fireflies." Finally, let us explore the legacy of French civilization and the Enlightenment of its rise. After the Renaissance, France consolidated national identity through the change of dynasties, strengthened centralization through political reforms, and relied on economic accumulation of wealth through economic innovation. expanded territory through military power, and shaped influence through culture and art. From Charles VII's Standing Army to Louis XIV's Versailles Palace, from Richelieu's power to Voltaire's Light of Reason, the rise of France has not only changed the political map of Europe, but also spread the seeds of freedom and equality all over the world. This history reveals that the prosperity of a country requires not only the hard power support of the military and economy, but also the soft power radiation of institutional innovation and cultural ideas. As Voltaire said, the power of civilization lies not in the height of the city wall, but in the breadth of thought. When we talk about the rise of France, what are we talking about? From Clovis's battle axe to Voltaire's quill pen, from Richelieu's spy network to Colbert's porcelain factory, the rise of France has never been the result of a single force, but a wonderful mixture of violence and elegance, piety and betrayal, reason and madness. As Tocqueville said in The Old Regime and the Revolution, the French always swing between two extremes, but it is this swing that makes them the thunder that breaks the old world. Dear viewers, I am Lawrence, your time navigator. DEEPSIGHT is a serious channel that explores the truth of history. It shows the full picture of history through multidimensional analysis of history, politics, economy, culture, etc. Your patience in reading this proves that you are a historical spirit with a true spirit of exploration. Learning from people can help you understand gains and losses, and learning from history can help you understand the rise and fall. I hope that today's sharing will give you a new understanding of the history of France's rise. Let us work together for the civilization and peace of the world. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with more history lovers. In the next issue, we will explore how the French Revolution reshaped the modern world, so stay tuned.